Hey everyone, you're watching We Had That, and today I'm going to talk about the 1982 Eagle Force Savitar action figure. There are a couple things I want to bring up about the Eagle Force right from the beginning. First, the copyright date on these figures is 1981. However, I believe that they actually arrived in stores in 1982. I could be wrong about that. Also relating to their release date, I've both read and heard people say that the Eagle Force was Mego's response to Hasbro's Real American Hero G.I. Joe line, but that is not the case. I don't trust my memory 100% on this, but I believe I had Eagle Force figures before I ever saw 3 3/4 inch G.I. Joes. But even if that isn't the case, work on developing these characters for Eagle Force began in April of 1981. About a year before anyone at Mego would have seen the 1980s G.I. Joe characters in stores. So there's no way that Eagle Force was created in response to the 1980s G.I. Joe line. Although Mego had spent most of the previous decade as heavy hitters in the toy industry with their 8-inch figures, Kenner had brought every other toy manufacturer to their knees with the release of their 3 3/4 inch Star Wars figures, making this the size that was going to be the new standard for action figures, even for Mego. However, Mego was releasing some of their lines in both 8-inch and 3 3/4 inch sizes, like Chips and Dukes of Hazzard. Some of their other lines were released as both 12-inch and 3 3/4 inch figures without any 8-inch versions, like Buck Rogers, Star Trek the Motion Picture, and The Black Hole. With 3 3/4 inch being the new standard action figure size, why on earth would Mego choose to create a new line of characters that no one had ever heard of in a size that didn't fit with any other figures on the market? Eagle Force is one of the few lines that I specifically remember seeing for the first time on a television commercial. They looked awesome, and I just had to get some of them. A little while later, I remember seeing them for the first time in person in the store and being extremely disappointed that they weren't in scale with any of my 3 3/4 inch figures. Their size was such a turnoff to me that I briefly decided I didn't want them after all, but that decision was very brief. There must have been other kids with similar reactions to the scale. I assumed that since Eagle Force figures were die-cast metal, it was cheaper to make them smaller, so I thought the small size was a cost-cutting thing. It turns out the real reason for the size, and probably the only reason that Eagle Force was ever created in the first place, was that Mego had recently acquired the molds for a bunch of old Marks vehicles and playsets that were originally sold with little plastic army men. They were too small for the 3 3/4 inch figures, so I believe Mego decided to create a new line of figures that were specifically made smaller to fit along with these vehicles and playsets. The original pitch for a line called the Screaming Eagles turned into what we now know as Eagle Force. As a side note, although Eagle Force figures were the only figures in that size when they came out, later in the 80s, 2 more lines in that size arrived. Both Mask and Dino Riders figures were also 2 3/4 inches tall, so the Eagle Force team was no longer alone. One of the first figures I got from the Eagle Force line was Savitar, the Assassin. Although ninjas became extremely popular characters in the 1980s, Savitar was the first ninja action figure that I had. In the development stages of the Eagle Force line, Savitar was actually called simply Ninja, and the name Savitar was decided on closer to the release of the figures. Savitar wore a mostly dark blue outfit with a blue hood and black accents. He had a black belt, black armbands and socks, black accessories, and dark blue sandals. Unlike all of the Mego figures that I had before Eagle Force, who were licensed characters from comic books, movies, and TV shows, the Eagle Force figures were created specifically for this line of toys. So as kids, none of us knew anything about these characters beyond what we had seen in the commercials or read on the packaging for the figures. To help kids have an idea about who these characters were, Mego came up with the idea of including a one-page comic on the back of each package to tell a quick story about each character. The comic about Savitar showed him scaling an exterior wall of a government building before stealthily breaking in. He stole a valuable decoder right under the noses of the guards, and we learned that he was a master of all weapons before he stealthily leaves the scene of the crime. There was also a description of each figure's gun at the end of each comic. The Savitar figure came with an MP5 submachine gun, which is not only a real gun first released in the late 60s, but also a very popular gun used around the world. Because the MP5 that came with Savitar had a fixed buttstock, I believe it was probably modeled after the MP5A2, which I believe was also first released in the late 60s or maybe early 70s. In the early 1980s, when the Eagle Force figures were being designed, the MP5 was possibly best known as a gun used by the British SAS, although it was also used by SWAT teams in the United States throughout the 80s as well. The artwork on the package for Savitar shows him with a curved magazine on his MP5, and even the details about the gun on the back of the card show a curved magazine. But the figure actually came with an MP5 with a straight magazine. Both versions could have been used with the gun, but the differences in the art versus the actual toy have created some confusion for people who are trying to collect loose Eagle Force figures. I'm curious what you think of Savitar. Did you have a Savitar action figure when you were a kid? What did you think of him back then? What do you think of him now? Was he a favorite villain, or did he just sneak around your toy box all day? Tell me in the comments below. Also, please give this video a thumbs up, and if you have a chance, it would be great if you would share it on social media. If you enjoy my content, please subscribe to my channel and hit that notifications bell so you'll know when I post new videos. And one last thing, if you're a fan of toys, you should know about ToyLanta, the biggest toy show in the southeastern United States, held annually just north of Atlanta, Georgia. Visit ToyLanta.com for more information. As always, thanks for watching.